Good evening. I'm Ian Wardropper, Director of the Frick Collection. Pleased to welcome you all tonight to the first lecture honoring and celebrating and explicating the exhibition Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Hals, Masterpieces of Dutch Painting from the Mauritshuis, which will be here at the Frick until January 19th. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Emilie Gordenker, Director of the Royal Picture Gallery Mauritshuis. Through the course of working with her on this wonderful exhibition that's just opened, I have come to truly admire her collegiality, professionalism, and openness to ideas. She and her colleagues in The Hague were generous in loans, especially when we returned to them to ask for additional paintings for the show that's here. I think our two institutions collaborated so happily because we are both house museums and both aspire to show the very best of the artistic traditions we represent. As a result, there's an evident harmony between the temporary exhibition here from the Mauritshuis, though we'd be happy if it would be permanent, and the permanent collection of the Frick. This working relationship was no doubt made easier because Emilie is no stranger to New York. She received her doctorate up the street at the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University, in 1998 for the dissertation Van Dyck and the Representation of Dress in 17th-Century Portraiture, which was subsequently published in 2001. Also in New York, she worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Frick Collection, and the Netherlands Institute for Art History, as well as taught at several universities in the region. She's published and lectured widely, particularly on Dutch and Flemish art of the 17th century. She moved to Great Britain in 1999, eventually becoming senior curator of early Netherlandish, Dutch, and Flemish art at the National Gallery of Scotland in Edinburgh in 2003. 5 years later, she became the director of the Mauritshuis. Since taking up her position there, she has led an ambitious project to expand that space for programs and activities that are hampered by the tight constraints of the 1630s house, which bursts at the seams in containing the collection of 800 paintings. She will take us through this exciting initiative in her lecture titled Royal Picture Gallery Mauritshuis, Past, Present, and Future. Emilie.
Thank you so much, Ian. And thank you also for explaining or giving the answer to the question I usually get at the beginning of every lecture, which is, why do you speak English with an American accent? Well, now you know. I'm half American and half Dutch, and consider myself something of a New Yorker, having lived here for some 12 years. This evening, it's really a great pleasure for me to tell you about the collection and the building that form the Royal Picture Gallery Mauritshuis. And I'm going to do this in two ways. First of all, by telling you about the collection's past, but at the same time by looking forward to its future. And this will probably sound like a paradox, but the Mauritshuis has a very rich history, one that informs where we are as a museum in 2013 and going forward. Now, anyone who's visited the Mauritshuis probably recognizes the image on screen now and knows what a special place it is. The museum combines two essential ingredients. It's got a truly great collection of Dutch and Flemish paintings housed in a spectacular 17th century city palace. The collection is really remarkable for its focus and for its quality. So it's not a big collection. As Ian mentioned, 800 paintings, most museums would consider that small. But it's one of the top 4 in the world for Dutch paintings. And so the quality of the collection of Dutch works is really on a par with those at the National Gallery in London, in Berlin, and at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. The building itself is one of the most remarkable surviving examples of 17th century architecture in the Netherlands, and it provides an impressive, but at the same time intimate atmosphere for the paintings. And as a result of this small scale and the wonderful collection. The Mauritshuis is often called the jewel box of Dutch museums, and for many, the Mauritshuis is the most beautiful museum in the Netherlands, if not in Europe. And now, I'm very sorry to tell you that we couldn't bring the building along with us to New York. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the history of the building before we go to the history of the collection. And the Mauritshuis, that's, by the way, the easiest way to pronounce it, is named after the man who had it built. And he's on screen now, Johan Maurits, Count of Nassau-Siegen. Now, Johan Maurits had a motto, in Latin, qua patet orbis, which translates for as far as the world extends. And this was perfect for a man who was completely unafraid of adventures and challenges. He had a very daring attitude to life that had been instilled in him from birth, really. His grandfather and father, John VI and VII of Nassau, were military men, and so Johan Maurits was really destined to become a soldier, or more than that, an officer. He was only 17 when he joined the army, and his star rose so quickly that he was promoted to the rank of captain at the age of 22. He enjoyed many important victories. Now, at this time, the governors of the West India Company noticed this very successful young military hero. The West India Company, you may be familiar with the East India Company. The West India Company was also set up in the Netherlands, and it conducted shipping and trade with West Africa and North and South America. It also, by the way, did its best to undermine the position of Spain and Portugal outside of Europe. And so, given these facts, the governors of the West Indies Company thought Johan Maurits might be the man to serve as governor, captain, and admiral general of the territories captured from the Portuguese in Brazil. Johan Maurits accepted and set off for faraway Brazil by ship on the 25th of October, 1636. Now, in fact, Johan Maurits is today better known in Brazil than he is in the Netherlands. While he was governor there, Johan Maurits put an end to Portuguese insurgencies and set about building a new capital, which he, of course, named after himself, Mauritsstad, or Maurits City. And I'm showing you here a print of that city on the screen. Johan Maurits managed to keep the hostile Portuguese at bay. He created a climate in which trade could flourish. And the success of this trade, I should say, was largely due to slave labor on sugar plantations. This crop was sold on to the Dutch Republic. So it might seem a bit of a conflict to say that even so, Johan Maurits was a truly enlightened governor. He was much more interested in things beyond just economic and military success. He was curious about the local population, and the indigenous plants and animals. And so what he did was he brought along scientists who produced significant writings about Brazil, and he also asked artists to join him. Franz Post and Albert Eckert are the best known. Now, this is a painting by Franz Post, who painted really true-to-life Brazilian landscapes. They have a kind of a naive charm. And this painting, which shows the island Itamaracá, is one that we always display in the Mauritshuis. And I can tell you, I was there not so long ago, and it still looks exactly like this. This is only one of 7 surviving paintings that the artist made while he was in Brazil. The other artist, Albert Eckert, concentrated on Brazil's people as well as its plants and animals. And his most important paintings are actually now in Copenhagen. It's kind of a long story, but Johan Maurits liked to trade his things in order to upgrade his title. So off they went, this is one of a series of paintings that are now in Copenhagen. And this shows a native Brazilian figure. You can't really see it here on screen, but it's true. It's a full-scale, true to life painting. Now, it was during this period that Johan Maurits was in Brazil that he had the Maurits house built, right in the middle of The Hague. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the building in a moment. But Johan Maurits was, during the building project, still in Brazil, and he was getting a little itchy because he felt like he wasn't getting enough support from the West Indies Company, so he resigned in 1642. 2 years later, he was back in The Hague, where he moved into this beautiful new house, which had just been finished. And he transformed this city palace into a grand cabinet devoted to Brazil. You can imagine he commissioned frescoes of Brazilian landscapes. He had a huge collection of all kinds of artifacts, feathers. He even had people with him. And mounted animals, musical instruments, rocks and shells. It must have been a glorious sight. And I'm really sorry that we have absolutely no idea what it actually looked like because there's no record of the way it was decorated at the time. Now, Johan Maurits, I mentioned earlier, was always after a good title. He was appointed Stadtholder of Cleve in 1646, and he immediately set about building his summer palace. So he just moved in here to this Maurits house, and he quickly moved on. While he was away, he would lend out his house, and this is a print. This is actually the only surviving image we have of the interior of the Maurits house. And it shows a banquet that was held to mark the departure of the English King Charles II in 1660. Johan Maurits was also elevated to the rank of prince by Emperor Ferdinand III in 1652 and appointed commander-in-chief of the States Army in 1668. And in that year, he had a garden of the Maurits house built, and he had a portrait bust placed in it. So this is another image of Johan Maurits. The bust did not continue to serve as garden sculpture for very long. In 1669, Johan Maurits decided to take it with him to his future tomb in Siegen, Germany, but we keep this, which is a copy of the bust, in our museum. Johan Maurits, who built the Maurits house, never married, and died on the 20th of December, 1679, right near Cleve. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Johan Maurits had this very impressive city palace constructed in The Hague between 1633 and 1644. And what you see on screen now is a drawing by the assistant to the architect that shows you what it looked like right at the time of it being built. And the location of this is actually really ideal. It's located right next to the Binnenhof, which is still today the seat of the Dutch government. And the architect was the best that the Netherlands had to offer at the time. His name was Jacob van Kampen. And Van Kampen also designed this. You may recognize it. It's today the Royal Palace in Amsterdam. But was built in the 17th century as the Amsterdam City Hall. And these two buildings, the Royal Palace and the Maurits House, are really among the most striking examples of Dutch classicist architecture. And here's the Maurits House seen from the other side. You might be interested to know that this round tower here is actually our Prime Minister's office. So we have very lofty neighbors. After Johan Maurits died, all kinds of things happened to the building. It came into the hands of the Maas family, who rented it out. And just before Christmas, in 1704, a huge fire broke out. The English Duke of Marlborough was living there at the time, and only the outside walls of the Maurits house survived. There's actually a rumor that somebody fell asleep, probably had a glass of wine too many, and a candle fell over, and the whole building burst into flames. Fortunately, the house after the fire was not demolished but restored, and that took quite a lot of time. And the decision was made to preserve the exterior, so that wonderful 17th century classicist exterior remained. But the inside of the house was given a completely new interior, including a modernized floor plan, white stucco walls, and a contemporary mantelpiece. Now, what I'm showing you here is what we call in Dutch the Gouden Zaal, or the Golden Room. And this is the grandest space in the house. And what you also see in this slide are paintings that were installed there at the time of the renovation, cycle here. And they were done by the Italian artist, Giovanni Antonio Pellegrini, who was very fashionable, and he happened to be staying in The Hague at the time, so he was commissioned to provide this cycle of paintings. And I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit to our time now, because we removed these paintings recently from the interior. You see them coming down on the top slide, and we are currently restoring them. They're almost finished, and they look absolutely terrific. Now, in the 18th century, the Maurits house was used as an ambassador's residence. Later, it also served as a military school. Then the cellars were rented out for wine storage, and there was even a time when it served as a jail. So a lot happened here. But finally, the Royal Library moved into the building in 1807, and it was improved then. The library got too big, so in 1820, the Dutch state bought the Maurits house in order to house what they called royal cabinets of paintings and curiosities. And this made the Maurits house a museum once and for all. It opened its doors to the public in 1822. I hope I've now given you some idea of the history of the building. But the collection has a very different story. Its rich history has roots in the holdings of the Princes of Orange, and this explains our official name. We like to be called the Maurits House, but officially we're called the Royal Picture Gallery Mauritshuis. The collection has seen many ebbs and flows, and it's quite different from some other royal collections in Europe, which tended to be more stable. Collections like those that you can see in Vienna and Madrid. I think we can say that any European collection, really a royal collection, is based on the idea that an important part of an enlightened ruler was to collect. And in the case of the Netherlands, it was really Hendrik III, the first Count of Nassau, who started to develop an interest in art collecting and made a collection of some importance. But it was really Frederick Hendrik, whom you see here on the left, Prince of Orange and Stadtholder from 1625, who was the most important collector of 17th century Dutch paintings. Just in parentheses, I'm using the term Stadtholder. The Netherlands didn't have a king until the 19th century. But what they did have was representatives from the royal family who were the nominal heads of state, and that we call a stadtholder. Now, Frederick Hendrik, you see here with his wife Amalia von Solms, had both become acquainted with the royal courts of Europe in their youth. And they came back to The Hague and must have thought it was a kind of provincial, pokey little place, so they turned it into a real princely residence. They built a lot of buildings or renovated in and around the city, and they also had real art galleries set up in the Stadtholder's quarter. They collected paintings mostly by contemporary Dutch artists, and had a strong preference for painters from the city of Utrecht. And what you see on the screen here is a work by Gerrit van Honthorst, the portrait, double portrait. Just to give you another idea, this is another painting by Honthorst in our collection, and gives you a sense that he was very much a Caravaggio follower. Now, the inventories of the collections of Frederick Hendrik and Amalia van Solms also list works by Rembrandt. And they had a particular interest in contemporary art of the southern Netherlands. Kind of strange for us to think about that now, but at that time, Rubens was the cutting edge and very radical. Frederick Hendrik bought many paintings by Flemish artists, including this work. This is not on view here now. This is in The Hague at the moment, but this is an oil sketch, first idea of what eventually became the altarpiece in the Cathedral of Antwerp. Now, Amalia died in 1675, and all of her possessions, including this fantastic collection of art, were divided up among her heirs. 3 of her daughters were married to German princes, so a large part of the collection left the Dutch Republic for good. Amalia's grandson, and I'm showing you here a bust of William III, had been stadtholder since 1672, and he started building up the collection once again by making new acquisitions. And he branched out and started to buy Italian works, which really was a new course for Dutch collectors. William III acceded to the English throne in 1689, so he became England's King William III as well. And at that time, he transferred more than 30 paintings from the English royal collection, including splendid portraits by Hans Holbein the Younger, and this fabulous painting by Gerrit Douw, back to the Netherlands. So the paintings, like the stadtholders and the kings, went back and forth across the channel. And I bring this up because this beautiful painting came back home to the Netherlands and is today an important work in the Mauritshuis collection. After the death of William III, there were more disputes about the succession and the division of his property, and the art collection was divided up all over again. A number of masterpieces were seized by the kings of Prussia, and other important paintings were auctioned off. This is William IV, stadtholder, who tried to piece together the dispersed collection. And he bought various collections through bequests, including paintings that had belonged to his distant cousin William III and even Amalia van Solms. So, for example, this painting, an early work by Rembrandt, and it's in here at the Frick now. William III bought this at auction because it was known or thought to be in the stadtholder's original collections. Friedrich Hendrik, who had probably bought this painting early on, will have known Rembrandt personally, and he commissioned quite a number of works from Rembrandt. So this now is, in fact, back in the royal collection. William IV also made some important new acquisitions. He branched off. He bought, for example, this painting, The Bull by Paulus Butter. This is by far the largest painting in our collection. And anyone here who's from Holland probably knows it. It's one of the most familiar Dutch images still today. But it was actually William V, the man you see on screen now, who was responsible for making the House of Orange's collection of paintings princely yet again. William V had been really interested in art from a very young age, and he took a serious interest in collecting. He had great success at auction. For example, he bought this fabulous Garden of Eden, which is a collaborative work between Jan Bruegel the Elder and Rubens. Bruegel was a specialist in landscape paintings and highly detailed animals and figures. But as you can see here, Rubens contributed the figures and the horse. This kind of collaborative work was not uncommon in Flanders at the time. But what is very uncommon here is that this work is still in almost perfect condition. William V also bought this. The Susanna by Rembrandt was another high point in collecting and is here at the Frick collection now. It's really a perfect example of Rembrandt's small-scale biblical paintings from the 1630s. Now, when you go into the exhibition and see this work, it's going to look somewhat different. This is how it looks unframed, and this is how it looks in the exhibition. We know quite a lot about what happened to this painting. In the past, someone had the bright idea of making it square, so there were corners added to the top and a whole strip down one side. The Mauritshuis has a very eminent research department. We took a long time to look into this and discovered that this was, in fact, much closer to the original format, and so we had a frame made with the help of our American friends, and it is now reframed and in the exhibition. William IV and William V kept their collection in the Stadtholder's Quarter, but it got so large that William V needed a new building. He bought 2 nearby houses. One was for his library and the natural history collection, and the other was renovated to accommodate the collection of over 200 paintings. It was a Royal Picture Gallery, and it opened in 1774. He opened it to the public. We still have the rules. You were allowed to go at certain points of day, and you had to be well dressed. Those were the rules. But because it was open to the public, that makes it the first public art collection in Holland. It was a real milestone in Dutch history. And what you see here is how the gallery looks today. It's still part of the Maurits house. It was renovated recently and reopened by, sorry, it's a small picture, but this was at the time our crown prince and is now the king of the Netherlands. So I encourage you to come and have a look at the gallery. Only 20 years after the gallery was opened, the paintings were all removed. What happened was Napoleon had invaded Holland in 1795. William V fled, and the whole art collection was seized and taken to the Louvre in Paris, where, by the way, it was a sensation and really encouraged French interest in Dutch art. After Napoleon's defeat at the Battle of Waterloo, the Dutch repossessed the paintings and brought them back to The Hague by horse and cart. And I'm showing you here a drawing of how that looked at the time. You can see all the paintings being taken back in horse-drawn carriages. William V, stadtholder, had died by this time. His son, who became King William I, handed over the entire collection to the state in 1816. And since then, what was originally the stadtholder's collection have been a state collection, the Royal Picture Gallery. As I started in this lecture talking about the building, so we're back to the building now. And I mentioned before that the Maurits House opened its doors as a museum in 1822. In the first years, a large number of paintings were exhibited there, but only on one floor. So they only used the top floor for the paintings. The lower floor was used to display a natural history collection. Now, 274 paintings is quite a lot. When you compare it to today, we normally hang around 250 in the entire building. So it must have just been filled to the brim. And this King William I played a really important role in expanding the collection. For example, the Great View of Delft by Johannes Vermeer. He bought it and insisted that it go to his Maurits house. I'm sorry to say that we've left this one in The Hague. It's very delicate. It has traveled in the past, but we've done a little bit more looking into its condition. So it's too delicate to come to the States anymore. I do encourage you to come and see this as well. But it's not just this. William I bought this sensational Lamentation of Christ by Roger van der Weyden, which is still the only work in the Netherlands attributed to this important artist. And in 1828, the Maurits House acquired a painting that has become one of its icons, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolaas Tulp by Rembrandt. I'm going to fast forward a little bit and tell you something about one of my illustrious predecessors, very big shoes to fill. This is Mr. Abraham Bredius, who was appointed director in 1889. What's interesting about Bredius is that he was a qualified art historian with museum experience and a broad network of contacts. So what happens with Bredius is he really starts professionalizing the museum. Bredius had a great eye and many connections which helped him make great acquisitions. So, for example, in 1894, he bought this portrait of an unknown man. It was put on the market, and he was convinced it was by the important early Netherlandish painter Hans Memling. He turned out to be right. And in fact, there's a wonderful example of Memling's work here at the Frick. The following year, Bredius struck it lucky again by acquiring The Goldfinch by Carl Fabricius. Bredius managed this through an agent acting on his behalf at a Paris auction. This painting, which is also here at the Frick now, is small in scale. It's only about this big. But You can see how it looks on the screen. It's monumental in feeling and is one of our visitors' favorites. In fact, not only our visitors, but the writer Donna Tartt seems to love this painting as well, because she has literally just published a novel in which this plays a central role. You'll be able to see it here first. Now, Bradius wasn't just a good collector, but he had great connections, and he used them to secure loans, which he then lent to the museum. And he would make good connections also with private collectors and encourage them to lend their masterpieces to the museum. We're familiar with this idea today, but at the time it will have been groundbreaking, because his idea was, if you have really unique works on loan, many of which are being shown to the public for the first time, it will attract more visitors to the museum and ensure the involvement of collectors. And this, in turn, often led to important bequests. And the girl with the pearl earring, this is a different way of looking at her. This is a most sensational example of a benefactor helping a museum. The benefactor's name was Arnoldus de Stombe, and he bequeathed 12 works to the museum, including this one. But that is a story unto itself. You see, this painting came up for auction in 1881 in a small auction house in The Hague, and it was filthy. No one knew or recognized what it was. Vermeer was at that time not the great big name that he is today. And this collector, de Stombe, as well as a prominent art advisor named Victor de Stures, the two of them had spotted the painting. They discussed it and agreed not to bid against each other, and managed to buy it for only 2 guilders and 30 cents. This is the equivalent of about $1 today. It was cleaned, and it turned out to be the fabulous painting that we know today. But de Stombe didn't say anything. It was only when he died in 1913 that it became clear he had left the painting to the Mauritshuis. Bradius himself made a sizable bequest, which came to the Mauritshuis after his death. 25 paintings, including highlights such as what you see on screen, Rembrandt's Homer, and also Rembrandt's Andromeda. Bradius, by the way, stipulated in his bequest that all of his paintings may never leave The Hague, so they're there right now. After Bradius departed, the collection continued to grow, often through good contacts with private collectors. During the difficult financial period between the two world wars, the Mauritshuis could count on the generous support of Sir Henry Deterding, who donated, among other things, these 2 works: The Woman Writing a Letter by Gerard Terborch on the right side, and Jan Steen's Oyster Eater. Both of these paintings are in the show here. You may wonder what happened during the Second World War. At that time, the most important paintings were put into bomb-proof storerooms, and the collection survived the war without any serious incident. The post-war period was very prosperous for the Mauritshuis. A huge number of important acquisitions were made in the last 70 years, and I'm certainly not going to show them all to you, but they include Rembrandt's self-portrait, one of only 3 made during the last year of his life. And more recently, also by Rembrandt, this stunning portrait of an old man, and this is also in the exhibition. And it is a really marvelous example of Rembrandt in his later years. It's in wonderful condition, and it will really be a treat for you to look at this. So, the collection of the Mauritshuis continues to be a work in progress, and I hope you're all wondering why a museum with such treasures continues to buy pictures when it already has so much. To my mind, a collection is like a living animal. It needs to grow and to be refreshed in order to remain lively and healthy. We're always trying to strengthen the core of the collection and fill gaps. But it's not that easy, because any acquisition must meet the very, very high standards of the Mauritshuis. It has to be great quality, it has to be small in scale so it looks good in the building, and it has to hold its own against jewels like the ones I've shown you on screen just now. Our collection doesn't strive to be complete. We're not encyclopedic, but what we do look for is only the best. And that includes some of the great masters like Rembrandt, But we also look for paintings that are the very best work by lesser-known artists of the Dutch Golden Age. And I'm going to give you a couple of recent examples. In 2011, we added this bouquet by Dirk de Brij to the collection. And what's marvelous about this is that it's very casual in feeling. It feels almost like an 18th century painting. In fact, it's very unusual because all of the flowers in the still life actually bloomed at the same time. And you almost never see that in Dutch flower paintings, which show blossoms that would have come out in various times of the year. The bouquet is also not finished. So it's a really unique piece, and it's in outstanding condition and really supplements the collection. We also recently bought this, a still life painting by the Flemish woman painter Clara Peters. This, along with the girl with the pearl earring, these are the only two paintings that we regularly refer to as she. And our most recent acquisition was this landscape by the Flemish artist Paul Brill, who held a very important position in the development of Dutch landscape paintings. Now, the Mauritshuis doesn't just collect paintings, but we take care of them as well. And we have a conservation studio. It's actually in the attic of the building. And our conservators have an important job. They keep an eye on the collection, but they also carry out restoration and technical investigations of our painting. Now, restoration deals with the way a painting looks, usually by taking away surface dirt, old varnish that's discolored with age, and retouching, so it's a paint applied during a previous restoration. But these days, all restorations are begun by undertaking a really thorough study of the painting's treatment history and condition, and very often also scientific analysis. And what we're trying to do by that is to give a really clear understanding of the work, how it was made, what's happened to it over time, and what we think it originally looked like. We only really start treatment if we think the painting needs to be stabilized, and we want to make it look as good as possible. But I can assure you that every treatment we undertake is reversible, meaning that the next generation of conservators can undo all that work we've done and make sure that no damage was done. We also document everything. And this is a very important part of the research function of a museum. And I'm going to tell you, as a very good example, something about the treatment of the girl with the pearl earring, which was undertaken in 1994. This is what it looked like before conservation. It was stable, but it didn't look great. It had last been treated in 1960 by the usual restorer at the Mauritshuis, whose name was Mr. Traas. And he liked to employ a tinted varnish, so a varnish with a little bit of a yellow tone to it. Because at the time people thought that looked better, it looked, more authentic. And you can see how very yellow the painting looks. It also had a very complicated network of cracks all over. This is a drawing actually that shows you the craquelure on the painting. And some of these have been filled with dark material and old retouchings, and it just looked really patchy and uneven. So before beginning the treatment, our conservators gathered as much information about the history of the painting and examined it in great detail. And the first thing they did was they started to remove the varnish. And you can see that's very dramatic. You can see up here the varnish is taken away, and you can see the difference in the color. And this is done, I promise you, very safely using cotton swabs and a little bit of solvent, and it's very painstaking work. When all the retouchings were removed, and this is the big shocker, dramatic, this is what it looks like in a clean state. It's actually not in horrible condition. It's actually quite good condition for a 17th century painting. This kind of loss is pretty normal. We also made an x-ray of the painting, and x-rays turn up the lead white in the painting, so they tell us a lot about there were losses in this area. And this sorts of loss is usually caused by earlier restorations of pictures that they were less sophisticated than they are now, along with poor conditions in which the painting would have been kept before it joined our collection. The next step is to, once it's stripped like this, you put a very thin layer of varnish over it so that anything you do subsequently can be reversed. And that's what you see here. This is a detail. You can see there was a loss around the eye, and that's filled in very carefully and then retouched with a new paint, just so very soluble and stable so it won't discolor. And then voila, that's what she looks like with her facelift. And then as a last step, of course, a layer of varnish was applied so that we won't have to do this for a very long time again. And what you see here is how wonderfully the Vermeer's bright palette came out, the reflections in the earrings and the wonderful details on around her face and her lip. All the subtlety is visible once again. Now, this is pretty standard procedure for us. It wasn't anything all that unusual about the way that we proceeded in the work. But there were some exceptional things about this particular restoration. In the first place, it was done in public. So we had a conservation studio built under the forecourt of the museum, and you can see people could look down and follow the restoration. We also did some technical research that turned up many new insights into Vermeer's materials and painting techniques. But one of the most important findings had to do with the pearl itself. Now, this is a detail of the pearl before restoration. Can you see there's a highlight here and there's one here? I'm just going to compare it with the way it looks now. This highlight turned out to be a tiny piece of paint that had been dislodged in a previous restoration. It had flipped over and had landed on the pearl. The kind of scientific research that we do determined that this was not the original intention. It was carefully removed. And what you see now in the newly restored version is the way that Vermeer would have painted it, very carefully, very, well, in a way very freely, with just a few brush strokes, give you that sense of the reflection of the light coming from the window and also the reflection from her white collar. And I think I have one more slide of the whole so you can see how perfectly that illusion works. So I've told you now about the history of the building, the history of the collection, and the current state of affairs in relation to acquisitions, as well as conservation. So I'm giving you a lot to think about. But now I'd like to give you even more because I want to tell you a little bit about our plans for the future. In a way, the Maurits house is a victim of its own success. In recent years, we've been receiving well over 200,000 visitors a year. And that's quite a lot for a building that was originally designed as a house. What you see here is the way the Maurits house looked until recently. The gates to the forecourt were closed. The front door is not really usable because it's dangerous for the internal climate. It's not good for the paintings to let so much moisture in. So people used to have to come in through the side entrance here, service entrance. The Maurits house established a very active and successful exhibition program, but in order to do exhibitions, we actually had to move the permanent collection out of the main areas in order to accommodate these temporary shows. And this is, of course, not good for the paintings, but it also meant that many of our visitors who would come from abroad would actually miss a good part of the permanent collection. The Maurits house runs a very successful and innovative education program for children, but we had absolutely nowhere to do that. So we'd sort of do this before opening hours or camp in inappropriate spaces. We had a noisy and crowded cafe, and the museum staff actually worked in a separate building, so we didn't have the kind of contact that we would have liked. So the situation as of 2 years ago was really far from ideal. We knew this, but only recently did we find a solution, and that is this building, which is right across the street from the Maurits house. This is a 1930s building. It's a very good example of Dutch Art Deco. It's an extension to this larger building, which is a private club. And it had been rented out as an office building for some time. When I started as director in 2008, the first thing we did was conduct a feasibility study. Could we actually link this building to the Mauritshuis itself? And the answer was yes. And we had a competition, and the Dutch architect Hans van Heeswijk won it. And this is his very elegant design. I'll just walk you through it briefly. You can see the Mauritshuis here, the forecourt with the gates around it, but the big difference here is that the gates will be open. As a visitor, you'll walk through those gates and then you'll take a left, because as I mentioned before, the old main door is really not usable with this number of visitors. And you'll go down in this wonderful glass elevator or the stairs next to it. You can think about the Apple Store in Manhattan. You might recall the Louvre. It's the same idea. This brings you down into this very light and large foyer or atrium. This is the staging area for you to go back up into the city palace. This building, I think you'll notice something different about it. This is a drawing, it's not an actual photograph, but you can see that the windows have been replaced with those that look much closer to the original 17th century design, but they're also very modern, they're safe, and they help protect the paintings from too much light. We've also discovered the original color that the stonework was, the masonry was painted, and we've gone back to the original color. The interior of the building, we're also giving a little bit of a lift. We're going to have new wall coverings and much better modern lighting. So this part of the project is really intended to preserve what's so good about the Mauritshuis, that intimate atmosphere, the wonderful combination of architecture and of paintings. The new wing on this side is intended to support the main event. So over here, we're going to have an exhibition space, small, not very big, but big and flexible enough for us to be able to be inventive with our exhibition programming. We're going to have an auditorium. Like, you have a wonderful auditorium here, but we never had one, so we couldn't do programming for adults. It's cut away, but on the front, we're going to have a space. We're going to call it the art workshop for art education. We'll have a library, and our offices will be on the top floor. Let's see, this is an image. Again, this is a drawing, but this is how the new entrance will look. You'll come down the stairs or the elevator, go through a glass wall. These are the steps, and there's also an elevator into the old city palace. Here is for tickets, and beyond that is the shop and the new wing on that side. It's a very elegant design that manages to unite two completely dissimilar buildings. And here again, you have another view of the whole. This is the entrance here, the steps and the elevator up into the renovated city palace, right through here to the shop and up into the new wing. And one last view. The museum, we've been working on this for quite a while, these plans. We got all of our financing and planning permissions in place on time to start the project in April of 2012. All of the paintings have been moved out of the city palace. Some of them are in The Hague. Many of the ones I showed to you earlier, such as the anatomy lesson, the bull, the paintings that Bradius bought are all on display at the moment. This is the Hague Municipal Museum, the Gemeentemuseum. It's a fantastic example of Dutch modernist architecture. So if you're in The Hague, in the meanwhile, you can come and enjoy our collection there. And we started, as I mentioned, we started the building project on the 4th of June last year. And this is what it looked like about a month ago. You can see the exterior, the historic palace is coming along very well. The underground area is all finished now, and we are starting to refurbish the new wing. We are due to reopen in the middle of 2014, and I'm delighted to say that so far we're on schedule and we're on budget. And when this project is complete, the museum will be twice as large, have modern and up-to-date visitors' facilities, But importantly, also for the audience here at the Frick, it's going to have the atmosphere that it deserves, that small domestic atmosphere we will keep. This project offers many benefits. It's a lot of extra work, but it's really worth it. And one of these is the opportunity to send important works from the collection overseas. An earlier version of the show here at the Frick was held in Tokyo in 2012, and we attracted more visitors than any other exhibition in the world that year. From there, a slightly smaller version of the show went on to San Francisco, and then Atlanta, where it was very popular as well. And I have every reason to believe that lots of people will want to come and see our paintings here at the Frick. For us, we have another idea, another reason to want to be overseas in this extraordinary period. And the best way I can explain that is a little story. When we started our international tour, we had these things made. I know you can't see them from behind, but it's a little luggage tag, and it's got a reproduction of the girl with the pearl earring, and it says "See You" on it, and you can put your address on the back. Now, of course, my husband is under strict orders to always have this on his luggage. And he was on a business trip in the United States when someone he didn't know came running up to him and said, "Oh my God, I know that movie." That's great, but that also tells us we have some work to do. What we really want to be able to convey is, yes, it's a movie, but also it's a painting, and it's a painting that lives at the Mauritshuis in The Hague. And we very much hope that when we reopen next year, you and everyone will come and see the girl in her natural habitat at home. Thank you.
I share one thing in common with Emilie's husband. I too have that tag on my suitcase, which I have since she gave it to me a year and a half ago or so. So Emilie has kindly agreed to take some questions. I'm just going to start with one question. Has the Prime Minister complained about the noise of construction?
This is an excellent question. I'm delighted to tell you that the Prime Minister has not complained yet. The Dutch, if I may make a horrible generalization, Dutch people tend to like to discuss projects like this with you. They tend to be very free with their opinions. And so one of the challenges with this project is the fact that it's right by the Parliament building. It's very visible, and people tend we have a lot of very close friends, so a lot of people have an opinion about this. And I'm delighted to say, so far, so good. We've managed to keep open the lines of communication, and, for example, had no objections to our building plans when they were put forward to the public. There's a question right here. The question was why we didn't put the entrance in the new building. That was, in fact, our original idea. But the Dutch state architect, a wonderful woman, actually came to us with this comment. She said, you know, when you go to the Mauritshuis, you want to go in towards the main building. And if you put the entrance in the new wing, you're going to walk in with your back to the Mauritshuis. And that would be really contradictory to the whole experience. So that was why we did this. I should also mention that both of these buildings are monuments. So we really, I know New York has tough monuments rules and zoning laws. We have the same thing. And so what will happen in this design is actually this is the only element that you will see on the outside that will be new. It's transparent, it's round in form, so it echoes the Prime Minister's office, as well as the front of this building is also round. And it's meant to look like a kind of a movable and transparent piece of furniture that's landed in the forecourt. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for this loan to New York. I was one of the first people through the door yesterday and spent over an hour just in that one little room enjoying the pictures. I had been fortunate enough to go to The Hague and spend a day at the Mauritshuis, which I loved, and I can't wait to go back and see it again. I have a question for you. The girl with the pearl earring, those of us who were in New York at the time of the Liz Taylor auction saw La Pellegrina, which is one of the most largest, magnificent pearls, which went for $10 million, which is smaller than the pearl earring on the girl with the pearl earring. What do you think that earring really is?
I'll just repeat the question. We're on podcast now. Thank you, first of all, for being one of the first through the door and for enjoying our paintings so much. The question is about the pearl that the girl wears. I'm going to actually, I think I can scroll back very quickly and you can have a good look at her. Oops, there she is. This was almost certainly not a real pearl. It's too big. It's an impossibility. There are two ways we can explain it. Either it was costume jewelry that existed at the time. There were glass earrings that were made like this. But another very real possibility is that Vermeer just made it up. I mean, he was a fantastic artist. He would have no problem thinking up a bigger pearl and making it look very real. We don't know exactly which of those two it was. The other thing that you should remember is that the girl with the pearl earring is not a portrait. We know that. It's a type of painting that was described as a trony in the 17th century, and that's a study of head and shoulders, almost always wearing exotic costume. And she's in fact wearing a turban, which was not worn in the 17th century. So to her contemporaries, she would have been immediately recognized as a figure from history of some sort or another. So to have a very extra large pearl would suit this sort of exoticism of the image. I'm sure there are other questions. Yes.
Are you funded by the state or the country, and did they help you with the money, or did you have to go out and have a capital campaign?
This is an excellent question about the funding of the museum. It's a slightly complicated construction that some of you who know the United Kingdom might recognize. We are a private foundation. I answer to a board. But our mandate is to care for and display the government's art collection and the government's building. As a consequence, we do receive subsidy that half of which goes back to the government in the form of rent, and the other half, is intended for the care of the collection. We are one of the more entrepreneurial Dutch museums. We're a state museum. Many Dutch museums are city museums or provincial, but we are one of the 29 state museums. Of that group, we earn a very large percentage of our own income, roughly 50%. Some of that comes from ticket sales, some of it from sponsoring, some of it from private donors. And this is a challenging moment for us because the subsidy has been cut and the economy is not in the greatest shape in the Netherlands. That having been said, we dove into this this building project in spite of the economic climate. The expansion part we are funding ourselves, and the funding for that came out to about 22.7 million euros, a substantial amount of money. We raised that on our own, and that's a combination of money from the wonderful Dutch lottery, the Bank Giro Loterij. We have corporate sponsoring. We received a little extra subsidy from the state, European Union, foundation, from all over the place. The city palace is actually state property, and they are paying for the necessary renovations there, with the exception of lighting. What's very unusual about this is that the Mauritshuis are actually project managing that part of the project. We're the first Dutch state museum to run the building project ourselves. It's a real challenge to someone like me. I'm an art historian, but with good advice, which I certainly have, and lots of support, it's going very well. Thank you. There's another question here. Question is, what part of our collection do we not show? This is a very frequently asked question. It's as I mentioned earlier, a collection of about 800 paintings. When we reopen, about 250 will be in the Mauritshuis, about 150 in our gallery. We have over 100 out on permanent loan. So at any given time, about 2/3 of the collection is on display somewhere. You always, as a museum, need a little bit of a reserve. We're generous lenders to outside exhibitions, so you need some pieces in reserve to replace them. We've got a few works on paper. They're too delicate to be shown all the time. So a good deal of the collection is out, and what's in store is there for a good reason. The exhibition that was traveling first in Japan included some Flemish paintings, which came back to us after that tour. The exhibitions in San Francisco and Atlanta had more. They had 35 in total, so 20 other paintings. There were more landscapes. Actually, the selection here is wonderful because it gives you sort of the best of every single genre. So you're really getting the full experience. But it was just sort of more of what you see here. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that it's time to stop. So thank you very much.